Admiral James Stavridis joins me. He is the former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO, former head of Southern Command, retired United States Navy. Good morning, Admiral. How are you?
Doing great, Hugh. How's it going?
Very good. I believe that your book 2034 has had a salutary effect, your novel with Elliot Ackerman, on the media. All of a sudden, I am now seeing a wave of articles on the coming conflict with China, and today in the Telegraph, the coming conflict with Russia. Provocative moves in the Philippines, flying 20 jets over Taiwan, declaring they will stop and seize boats in the South China Sea. More people are alerted through fiction than anything else. So congratulations on that. But do you think it's overdone, or is it correct?
Well, what I will say is one of the sharpest observers of the international scene is a conservative geopolitical thinker named Neil Ferguson. He's written a whole series of books about a wide variety of topics, including U.S. and China. He did a column over the weekend. He's a fellow columnist with me at Bloomberg Opinion. And it was about how close is a war with China. And of course, he mentioned very nicely and cited the novel, along with a whole series of nonfiction sources. The last line in his article was, Stavridis gets everything right except the date. It's not going to be 2034, more like 2024. So I think that overstates it perhaps a bit. I stand by my dire prediction of 10 to 15 years because I don't think China feels it's quite ready yet. But certainly the tensions are rising. President Xi is using this to stoke the fires of nationalism in China. And the incident you describe of Chinese fighter jets over the Taiwan Strait is a new high, if you will, during this tense period. Watch out.
In Foreign Policy magazine online this morning, Admiral, there is an article that I want to read, just the headline in the opening graph. China's military could turn small clashes into major conflicts. It's not clear who's in command when things go wrong, by Blake Herzinger. And it begins by citing relations between the U.S. and China are fraught with escalating rhetoric and risk of miscalculation on both sides. Military affairs aren't the only aspect of the bilateral relation, but they're the most dangerous one. And it reviews that President Xi is pushing the envelope all over the place and that the unexpected conflict can gather very quickly. And it points to the 1968-69 conflict along the Russian-China border, the conflicts with India in the past, the invasion of Vietnam. You know how China acts. Every 15 to 20 years, they do something completely out of the box. And this time it would have unintended consequences, I think.
It would indeed, and you cite good historical precedent. I'll throw another one onto that barbecue, and that would be 1914, August. Let's go back there. Here are the great powers of Europe are intertwined economically. Many serious books are written about how it would be impossible for these nations to go to war because the economics will keep them from doing so. What happens? A Serbian extremist in an obscure corner of the Balkans assassinates a Grand Duke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I mean, it sounds like an opera, except the Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of the five great nations of the time, no longer exists because of that. The Russian Empire fell, and the guns of August, as Barbara Tuchman called them, go off, and they sleepwalk into a war based on an incident, one that had unintended consequences. So to conclude, flash forward to today, and I've been there. I've been a young 30-something sea captain driving a destroyer through disputed waters. These are young people. I was the oldest person on the ship out of like 400. And they're young and they have training in the military. They're going to defend themselves. They're going to defend their nation. And that's true on both sides. So it's not President Xi necessarily making a decision in the towers of Beijing. It's young officers on the ground or in the jets over the Taiwan Straits could lead to an incident. Nations can stumble into war.
Now, the Nixon seminar meets on Tuesday next, and co-chairman Pompeo and O'Brien are hosting Peter Thiel and their 15 members to talk about China. Peter Thiel is a China hawk. He believes that they are aggressively moving to control the world economy and do not hesitate to draw back from conflict. And among the topics will be, when does a move for Taiwan come? And as I prepare the materials to send out to the members of the seminar, the Taiwan move has moved up in many people's book. You mentioned it obliquely. It's 2034 in the novel by that name that you and Elliot Ackerman wrote. But a lot of people think President Xi is committed to 2027 or earlier. And I think that's actually becoming the consensus position, and not via invasion, but via little green men. Have you been reading those articles?
I have read the articles. I'll give you two impeccable sources at the very highest levels who are reading daily the intelligence, and that would be Admiral Phil Davidson, the commander of the Indo-Pacific. In other words, all U.S. military, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, etc., in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, Admiral Phil Davis, and his immediate subordinate, the Navy four-star admiral, who is in command of the entire Pacific Fleet commander, Admiral Lung, call sign Aquilino. The two of them, in open testimony before the Congress, and I was honestly quite surprised at their candor, but glad to hear it because we need to hear it. Both of them indicated that they felt that date was much closer, and Phil Davidson threw out within the next 6 years. So I try not to do math in public, but 2021 plus 6 is 2027. I think that's where a lot of this commentary is coming from, because here's a guy who eats, sleeps, drinks, wakes up in the morning thinking about what a war with China would be like and how it would start. He threw out that date. He was then supported by Admiral Aquilino, who is going to take his place, assuming confirmation of the Senate, which will come momentarily. And Admiral Aquilino, in his confirmation hearing, said he thinks it will come, quote, much sooner than people think. I think those two impeccable sources are what are driving a great deal of this conversation.
And that leads to the question, has Team Biden done enough to signal that we will stand by Taiwan? Or, weakness is provocative. It's always been weakness is provocative. If the CCP does not believe we'll do anything to help Taiwan, why not? It's a rich country. It's one China. It's the ambition. And some people believe President Xi promised his Politburo that he would get Taiwan by 2027 when they took away term limits. Are you expecting that kind of aggressiveness from President Xi?
Let me start by saying I hope not. And I hope someone the other day, Hugh, asked me, if you could force anyone to read your novel, who would it be? And I think the answer is pretty obvious. I would force President Xi to read it, and hope that he would have the same reaction the hundreds of thousands of people who I think will eventually read 24 will have, which is, boy, we don't want to get into a war with China, and they don't want to get into a war with us. So I hope President Xi does not. But as the saying goes, hope is not a strategy. The strategy ought to be to make it apparent to China that if they made a military move on Taiwan, it would be extremely costly. We can do that first and best by helping the Taiwanese be fully prepared. But I think, to your point, and to directly answer your question, I think it is time for the United States to step away from this policy of what's called strategic ambiguity and simply say we will not tolerate an armed invasion of Taiwan. And that ought to include cyber and little green men.
A senior East Asian diplomat told me last week, off the record, so I'm not going to name names, that 2027 is the hard deadline, and it won't be an invasion, it will be little green men, that they will simply fly in enough security forces, because there's quite a lot of back and forth. People don't understand Taiwan and the mainland just do a lot of business, and a lot of people come in and out, and they'll fly in enough people, and that they will have pre-planned, take the radio station, take the TV station, take the airport kind of approach. Would we then fly in support, Admiral?
I think under the current scenario, it would be unlikely because we would be presented with a complete fait accompli. I think in the scenario you're describing, and I'll say in a moment how we can avoid getting to that scenario, but in the scenario you're describing, our options are far less apparent, but they would include immediate, significant global sanctions on China. It would be much like what happened after Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. I think that's a pretty good description of what the playbook would look like. What we ought to be doing is helping Taiwan today prepare for that exact scenario. And that's more on the intelligence, information, internal, domestic action. How do you control airports? How do you screen passengers? How do you ascertain where the deep cells are planted in your nation? And all of that is hard work that I hope the Taiwanese are doing. I think they are quite cognizant of all the scenarios we've described. They are not without their own assets in this regard. But at the moment, I think we serve neither our interests nor those of Taiwan, nor really those of the world, by not having a forceful policy and stepping away from this idea of strategic ambiguity. That idea has passed.
Last question, Admiral. If you're General Secretary Xi and you're studying the Obama administration response to Ukraine and saying Joe Biden was in the room in that year, and you're extrapolating the conduct of Obama-Biden to Biden-Harris, what would he expect to happen after an invasion or a move against Taiwan?
What he might expect, and I think he would be mistaken, would be a similar response, which is to say, not much, just sanctions and words. What the Biden team needs to do is convince President Xi that we are serious, that this would not be a repeat. And that means more than arguing about human rights and Uyghurs, and those are important topics, but this is a much more important and direct form of military deterrence, and it is called telling China this will be more costly. The candle will not be worth the game, and we will not repeat the way we effectively sat by and watched Ukraine lose a third of its territory.
Yeah, the trouble is, we'll talk about it next week. How do you get them to believe that? Because they saw what we didn't do, which was everything, in 2012, and now they've got the Olympics, and the playbook is finish the Olympics and invade Taiwan. We'll talk about that next week. Admiral James Stavridis, congratulations. 2034 is the novel. It continues to sell. It's not in the backdrop. You must not be at home because it's not in the backdrop there, Admiral.
You've just got a tight shot. Open up the shot and you'll see it.
No, it's, let's blame it on Dwayne. All right, Admiral, well done. Thank you. 2034 is the book. I'll be right back, America. But don't forget, relieffactor.com. There it is. Already